Most people think time travel belongs to movies, novels, and late-night theories that fall apart under scrutiny. We are taught that time moves in one direction, that the past is fixed, the future unknown, and the present the only place where reality actually exists. Science reinforces this belief. Physics describes time as a dimension that can stretch or compress, but never break. And yet, scattered across official records, police reports, archived interviews, and forgotten documents, there are cases that do not behave the way time is supposed to behave. Cases that were investigated, documented, and then quietly set aside because no explanation could contain them. What you are about to hear is not a collection of rumors or internet myths stitched together for entertainment. It is one continuous case, one event that unfolded across decades, involved multiple witnesses, left behind physical documentation, and raised a question that has never been answered. And once you follow it from beginning to end, the idea that time is stable becomes increasingly difficult to defend. In the early afternoon of June 14, 1983, a man walked into a small municipal police station in the town of Ashford, Washington. Ashford was not a place where unusual things happened. It was a quiet logging town near the edge of Mount Rainier National Park, surrounded by dense forest, long highways, and stretches of land where very little changed from one decade to the next. The man appeared calm, well-spoken, and physically unremarkable. He wore faded jeans, a light jacket, and boots that showed signs of long use. He did not look injured, intoxicated, or distressed. But when he spoke, the officer on duty immediately noticed something strange. The man asked what year it was. At first, the question seemed harmless. People traveling through rural areas often lost track of dates. The officer replied casually that it was 1983. The man paused. Not for a moment, but for several long seconds. He looked down at his hands, flexed his fingers slowly, and then asked again, more carefully this time, whether the officer was certain. When the officer confirmed the date, the man nodded, took a breath, and said something that would later appear verbatim in the station's incident log. He said, "Then I am further off than I thought." The officer asked for identification. The man reached into his jacket and produced a wallet. Inside was a driver's license issued by the state of Washington. The name on the license was Daniel Robert Hale. The date of birth was listed as March 22, 1958. The license appeared authentic. The photograph matched the man standing at the counter. The address was real. Everything about the ID passed an initial inspection. But there was a problem. It was outdated, but not obviously fake. When the officer asked Daniel how old he was, he replied that he was 25. By the calendar on the wall behind the officer, Daniel Hale should have been 25 in 1983, but the officer could not reconcile that with the condition of the license. It looked older than it should have been, worn in a way that suggested more than a decade of use. The officer asked Daniel why he had come to the station. Daniel hesitated, then said that he needed help understanding where he was. He explained that he had been hiking along a service road near the forest that morning. He remembered checking his watch, stepping off the trail to avoid a fallen tree, and then feeling an intense sensation of pressure, like the air had thickened around him. He described a sound similar to wind passing through a narrow tunnel, followed by a brief loss of balance. When he regained his footing, the forest looked the same, but something felt wrong. The light seemed sharper, the silence felt deeper, and when he reached the road, the vehicles passing by looked unfamiliar in subtle ways he could not immediately explain. Before entering the forest that morning, I had been driving to Ashford from Tacoma. The year, I said, was 1971. I was certain of this. I had checked the date on a newspaper at a gas station less than an hour before the hike. I remembered the headline. I remembered the price of gas. I remembered the music playing on the radio in my car. I had not traveled forward in time by decades. I had simply stepped somewhere I should not have, and time had moved without me. I insisted on one thing, that the last time I had checked the date, it had been 1971. I was not detained. I was not accused of anything. My behavior did not match that of someone experiencing a psychotic episode. I answered questions directly. I showed no signs of agitation. I did not claim special powers, divine messages, or grand conspiracies. The supervisor arrived and decided to verify my identity through state records. The name Daniel Robert Hale returned a match, birth certificate on file, school enrollment records, a partial employment history. Everything aligned until 1971. After that, the record went quiet. No tax filings, no employment, no marriage records, no death certificate. It was as if I had simply stopped existing in the system 12 years earlier. When asked about this, I said I could explain. I had not lived those 12 years yet. The police arranged for me to be evaluated by a local physician. The doctor found no evidence of neurological impairment. My vitals were normal. My reflexes were intact. I was oriented to my name, my location, and the people around me. The only discrepancy was the year. When asked to describe events after 1971, I could not. When asked about historical events that occurred after that year, I reacted with genuine confusion. I did not recognize the names of political figures who rose to prominence in the late 1970s. I was unfamiliar with cultural references that had become common by 1983. These were not selective gaps. What unsettled the physician was my emotional response. I was not distressed by my situation. I was curious. I asked careful questions about the world around me, not as someone pretending ignorance, but as someone trying to orient myself in unfamiliar terrain. I asked about changes in technology. I asked about Mount Rainier. I asked whether certain buildings in Tacoma still existed. My questions were specific, practical, and grounded. I was allowed to stay overnight at a local motel under police supervision. The next morning, a deeper investigation began. Officers visited the address listed on my driver's license. The house was still standing, but the occupants were different. The current residents had purchased the property in 1978. They had never heard of me. Neighbors who had lived in the area since the 1960s were interviewed. One elderly woman recalled a young man named Daniel who lived in the house with his parents in the late 1960s. I remembered him because he had a habit of fixing radios on his porch. I also remembered that one summer he stopped appearing. I assumed he had moved away. I recognized the house immediately. I described details of the interior that had since been renovated. I knew where the staircase had been before it was relocated. I knew the pattern of cracks in the driveway that had been paved over years earlier. These details were verified by old property photos stored in municipal records. They were accurate. When asked about my parents, I said my father had died in 1969 and my mother was alive when I last saw her. Records showed that my mother had passed away in 1976. When told this, I went silent for a long time. I did not argue. I did not deny it. I simply said that I had not been there for that. As the days passed, word of the case reached regional authorities. A state investigator was assigned. The working theory was that I had experienced some form of dissociative episode combined with identity loss. But this theory began to weaken as more inconsistencies emerged. My fingerprints were on file from a minor traffic violation in 1970. They matched perfectly. Dental records from a checkup in 1968 matched my current dental structure exactly, down to minor fillings. There was no evidence of aging beyond what would be expected from a man in his early 20s. No signs of 12 years of wear, stress, or environmental exposure. One detail, however, raised deeper concern. Daniel still had a wristwatch. It was a mechanical watch manufactured in the late 1960s. It was not unusual in itself. What was unusual was that it was still running accurately. The internal components showed no signs of having been serviced in over a decade. The lubrication inside the watch should have degraded. The springs should have weakened, and yet it kept time, as if it had been worn continuously without interruption. Daniel said he had checked the time on it just before stepping into the forest. Investigators returned to the location Daniel described. The service road existed. The fallen tree did not. But the area was remote enough that changes could go unnoticed. A search found nothing out of the ordinary, no sinkholes, no unusual geological formations, no signs of disturbance, and yet multiple compasses brought to the site showed minor deviations. Not enough to be alarming, just enough to be noted. Daniel remained in Ashford for several weeks. He cooperated fully. He never attempted to leave without permission. He never changed his story. He never exaggerated. He simply lived, observed, and asked questions. He learned that the world had moved forward without him. He learned that music had changed, that cities had expanded, that people now spoke differently about politics and technology. He adapted quickly, but not in the way someone pretending would. He did not overcompensate. He did not try to blend in immediately. He moved cautiously, like someone aware that they were out of place. One evening, Daniel asked to revisit the forest. Authorities agreed, accompanied by rangers and investigators. As they approached the area, Daniel grew quiet. He said the air felt different. He described a sensation of pressure in his ears. Nothing else occurred. No lights, no sounds, no distortion. The forest remained still. Daniel stood there for a long time, then said that whatever had happened before was no longer there. He said it felt closed. A week later, Daniel was transferred to a research facility in Olympia for further evaluation. Records of what occurred there are limited. Officially, the case was classified as unresolved. Daniel Hale was eventually released under supervised status. He was issued updated identification. He was assisted in finding housing and employment. And then, gradually, the paper trail fades again. The last confirmed record of Daniel Hale appears in 1985, a routine address update. After that, nothing. No arrest records, no death certificate, no employment filings, no medical records. It is as if he vanished a second time, but this time without witnesses. The dental records, the watch, the verified knowledge of a house he should not have remembered in such detail. There is another explanation, one that is rarely discussed outside of theoretical physics. The idea that time, under specific conditions, may not behave as a continuous flow, but as a field that can fold, overlap, or isolate regions temporarily. When they exit, the world has moved on without them. Not because they traveled forward, but because they were temporarily removed from the timeline. If this were the case, Daniel Hale did not travel to the future. He remained in his present while the rest of the world continued. And when he returned, the discrepancy appeared as time travel. This would explain the lack of aging, the intact watch, the missing years. It would also explain why the location no longer felt active. If such a phenomenon were unstable, it might close once disturbed. There is one final detail that complicates everything. In 1999, a hiker near the same region reported finding an old jacket buried beneath leaf litter. Inside the pocket was a receipt from a Tacoma gas station dated June 14, 1971. The paper was brittle but legible. The ink matched the printing style of the time. The receipt listed fuel purchased at a price consistent with that year. There was no name on it, just a timestamp. The find was logged, then forgotten. Whether this detail is connected to Daniel Hale remains unknown. No DNA was recovered. No further investigation followed. The forest continued to exist as it always had, quiet, indifferent, unaware of the stories attached to it. If Daniel Hale was mistaken, then he lived the rest of his life believing something impossible had happened to him. If he was telling the truth, then time failed once, in a way that left behind just enough evidence to be unsettling, but not enough to be undeniable. And if such a failure can occur once, in an unremarkable place, to an unremarkable person, then the question is not whether time travel is possible. The question is whether time has already done something far stranger, and whether we would even recognize it if it happened again. What do you think? Was Daniel Hale a man displaced by time, or a case study in how memory and reality can fracture under unknown conditions? Some questions don't come with clear answers. Some stories don't end. They linger. What matters is not what we think we know, but what we're willing to question. If this story made you pause, reflect, or look at the world a little differently, then it's done its job. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy thoughtful stories grounded in reality, curiosity, and careful analysis, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.